Those days were so tiring. I used to go in search of work, doing petty jobs to get by. Construction, landscaping, anything that paid cash and didn't require a resume. I felt like a cog in a machine, constantly grinding away, yet never getting anywhere. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was the mental fatigue that gnawed at my soul. I was a ghost, haunting the fringes of society, forever searching for a place to belong. Then, the phone call came. It was Ben, one of my few friends from the summer I'd worked at Camp Eerie. He'd been my roommate in the cramped staff quarters, a quiet, introspective guy who used to spend his free time reading poetry by the lake. His voice was shaky, and he was barely coherent. "You need to get here. It's happening again," he said. "What's happening?" I pressed, my heart tightening. "Just get here. Don't ask questions. Just get here," he choked out before the line went dead. My mind raced. This couldn't be good. Ben wasn't the kind of guy to make cryptic calls, especially not in the middle of the night, when the only sound was the relentless hum of the city. I grabbed my jacket, tossed a few essentials into my backpack, and got behind the wheel of my beat-up Ford Focus. The drive was a blur, the highway lights dancing in my rearview mirror, mimicking the racing thoughts in my head. Camp Eerie. It had been a haven of sorts that summer, a place where anxieties were momentarily forgotten, replaced by the simple joys of campfires, stargazing, and the camaraderie of fellow counselors. But there was a darkness that lurked beneath the surface, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. A strange unease that, looking back, was definitely foreshadowing the horrors that would later unfold. The further I drove, the more the memories of that summer surfaced. The kids, their laughter echoing across the sprawling grounds, their wide-eyed wonder as they told campfire stories, the thrill of leading them on nature hikes, the quiet moments spent watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues. But there were also the unsettling incidents. The seemingly harmless pranks that left a lingering chill, the strange symbols carved into the trees, the whispers of ancient spirits that haunted the woods. I had dismissed it all as simple camp folklore, the whispers of a community steeped in tradition. But now, something in the pit of my stomach told me that it wasn't just lore. It was something real, something sinister. The road turned into a dirt path, and I slowed down, my headlights illuminating the dense forest surrounding me. As I turned onto the familiar gravel driveway leading to the camp, a shiver ran down my spine. The campgrounds, once full of life and laughter, were now eerily silent. A sense of desolation permeated the air, like a shroud draped over the once vibrant haven. The main lodge, a sprawling Victorian-era structure, stood at the end of the driveway, a menacing silhouette against the backdrop of a moonless night. It looked different, somehow. The windows, once gleaming with warmth, were now boarded up, and the paint peeled from the wooden exterior, like a rotting corpse. As I approached the lodge, I noticed something off. The air was thick, unnaturally still. The scent of pine and damp earth, normally a familiar and comforting aroma, was replaced by a strange, pungent smell that lingered in my nostrils, like the stench of decay. A shiver ran down my spine. I parked the car and stepped out, the silence of the forest closing around me like a suffocating embrace. The temperature dropped dramatically, and a cold wind whipped around my legs, carrying with it a whispering sound, like 1,000 voices murmuring in the darkness. I started towards the lodge, my heart pounding in my chest, my every sense on high alert. I knew I was walking into something dangerous, something beyond my comprehension. The front door hung open, revealing a dark, gaping maw. A cold gust of air slammed into me, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of dread. I stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath my feet, their sound echoing in the empty hall. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The main lodge, once a bustling heart of the camp, was now a desolate wasteland. The furniture, worn but still sturdy, was overturned, the tables empty except for dust-covered plates. The walls were adorned with tattered posters from past summers, their vibrant colors now faded and dreary. I found Ben in the center of the mess hall, standing by a large stone fireplace. He was staring intently at the walls, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide and filled with unfocused fear. He turned towards me, his voice a strained whisper. You made it. Yeah, I made it, I replied, my voice barely a rasp. What's going on, Ben? He pointed to the walls, where strange symbols had been crudely painted in what looked like dried blood. They were intricate and disturbing, a jumble of jagged lines and circles, evoking a sense of primal fear. It's them, he whispered, his voice trembling. The same ones that haunted us before. They've come back. What are you talking about? I asked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The spirits, Ben replied, his voice barely a murmur. The ones that live in the woods. They've been here all along, watching us, waiting for us to leave. I tried to laugh it off, to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a frightened man. But the icy fear in his eyes, the chilling symbols on the wall, the eerie silence of the camp, it all conspired to sow a seed of doubt in my mind. Just then, the temperature dropped dramatically, and a guttural growl echoed through the empty lodge. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned, but all I could see was darkness closing in around us, the night alive with an unnameable dread. Run! Ben screamed, his voice filled with raw terror. They're coming. I didn't need any more convincing. I grabbed Ben's arm and we ran. We ran through the deserted corridors of the lodge, the sound of our pounding footsteps echoing in the silence. We ducked into the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of burnt food and mildew. We scrambled through the back door, into the night. The woods were a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The trees, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed to loom over us, their branches gnarled and twisted, like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us. We ran, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. The sound of something heavy and unseen crashing through the undergrowth behind us sent shivers down our spines. We reached the edge of the lake, our sanctuary from the summer before. Its surface was dark and still, reflecting the moonless night sky. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. We stopped, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding against our ribs. There was nothing behind us, just the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the sound of our ragged breaths. We huddled together, our bodies trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. The reality of our situation hit us like a cold slap. We weren't just running from a creature or an entity, we were running from something ancient, something primal, something that existed beyond the realm of human comprehension. We had to escape. We had to get out of the woods, get out of the camp, get as far away from this place as possible. But how? The night was a labyrinth of darkness, the forest a tangled web of fear. And the whispers, the chilling, guttural whispers, seemed to follow us, growing louder with every passing moment. We decided to follow the old trail that led to the back gate, a seldom-used path that was shrouded in dense foliage, a place where the sun rarely touched the earth. We moved silently, our footsteps muffled by the soft earth and the fallen leaves, our senses on high alert. The whispers grew louder, the air growing colder as we pushed deeper into the dense forest. The trees seemed to press in on us, their branches reaching out, their bark dark and rough, like the skin of a long-dead creature. We stumbled through the darkness, our fear a palpable presence, a constant companion. The forest whispered stories, ancient and terrifying, of creatures that lurked in the shadows, feeding on the fear of the living. Suddenly, Ben stopped, his eyes wide with terror. "They're there," he whispered, his voice raspy with fear. "They're watching us." I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, but I saw nothing in the darkness, just the endless black canvas of the night. The whispers intensified, growing into a chorus of guttural growls, a cacophony of sound that seemed to permeate the very air we breathed. "We have to run," Ben said, his voice urgent. "We have to get out of here." We sprinted through the darkness, our legs burning, our lungs screaming for air. The whispers chased us, their sound growing louder, their presence more menacing. We tripped over roots and fallen branches, our bodies battered and bruised, but we kept running, fueled by terror and the instinct to survive. The whispers turned to roars, a terrifying symphony of sound that seemed to shake the very earth beneath us. We reached the back gate, a rickety wooden structure that creaked and groaned under the weight of years. The gate was locked, a rusty chain and padlock sealing our fate. I threw my shoulder against the gate, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. It was too strong, too heavy, too secure. I turned to Ben, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "We're trapped," I choked out, the words barely audible above the roar of the approaching horrors. Ben was staring into the darkness, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with terror. "There's no escape," he whispered, his voice barely a murmur. "They're here." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange, unsettling calm. "They're waiting for us." And then, the darkness closed in, swallowing us whole. The shadows danced and shifted, forming horrifying shapes, their whispers turning into a guttural growl that echoed through the trees. They were coming. They were here. It was over. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the terror, the pain, the endless whispers that permeated the night. It was the end, I thought, my mind fading into oblivion. This cursed place had finally claimed us. But then, a hand reached out, a warm, familiar hand, pulling me back from the brink of darkness. The whispers faded, the shadows receded, and the world returned to its usual state of normalcy. We were back, safe and sound, in the familiar confines of Ben's apartment, the morning sun streaming through the window. Ben, pale and shaken, stared at me, a look of disbelief on his face. "It was a dream," he whispered. "It was just a dream." He held my hand, his touch firm and reassuring. We talked for hours, trying to make sense of the night that had passed, the night that seemed to bleed into the edges of reality, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that something wasn't right, something was lurking just below the surface. We decided to leave the city for a while, to escape the relentless hum of urban life and the oppressive weight of the memories that haunted us. We packed our bags and headed to the coast, seeking solace in the vastness of the ocean, the calming rhythm of the waves, the endless expanse of the horizon. We spent our days walking along the beach, watching the sun rise and set, feeling the cool sand between our toes, the salty air on our skin. We talked, we laughed, we shared stories, and for a while, we felt safe, almost whole. But the fear never truly left. It lurked just beneath the surface, a constant companion, a reminder of the darkness that had touched us, a reminder of the horrors that we had seen, the whispers that we had heard. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the wind howled and the waves crashed against the shore, I would feel a chill run down my spine, a sense of unease, a whisper of fear that reminded me of the night we spent in the woods, the night we ran from the creatures of darkness, the night we faced the unknown. It was a sharing apartment, and I was in college. We were crammed into a 5-story brick building, a vertical domino in a row of identical structures, all sharing a cracked asphalt parking lot. The 5th floor wasn't much to boast about, just a cramped studio with peeling paint and a perpetually stained carpet. We weren't supposed to be drilling, but the landlord was never around, and my roommate, Ben, was a firm believer in DIY everything. He'd been the one wielding the drill, a furious blur of sweat and effort, as he hung a new shelf in the cramped kitchen. He'd drilled right into the wall, and I'd braced myself for the usual complaints about the thin walls and the landlord's wrath. Instead, the drill bit had hit something solid, a dull thud that resonated through the room. Ben had grunted, his brow furrowed, and I'd stepped closer, my heart pounding with sudden anticipation. "What's wrong?" I asked, and he had just shrugged, wiping his brow, before muttering about some weird resistance, and continuing his drilling. He'd been close to the wall, the very edge of the tiny kitchen. He'd pulled the drill back, and stared at the hole, a perfect round aperture, the size of a fist, in the beige, cracking paint. It looked like a gaping eye, staring back at us. "What the hell?" Ben had mumbled, his voice strained. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. The hole was deep, a shadowy cavity that swallowed the light from the overhead bulb, leaving it a dark, swirling abyss. I had a sudden, chilling urge to touch it, to feel the smooth, cool edge of the hole, to understand what was hidden inside it. But then I saw it. A face. Not my face, but eerily similar, a reflection that seemed to shimmer in the darkness of the hole. It was pale, gaunt, and the eyes were large and black, pools of inky darkness that held a strange, unsettling intensity. The lips were thin, a line of crimson against the pale skin, and they were stretched into a ghastly, unsettling smile. "What the?" I stammered, my voice choked with fear. Ben was behind me, his hand on my shoulder, a tremor in his voice. "There's nothing there," he insisted, his voice shaky, a clear tremor in his voice. "You're just seeing things because of the light." But I knew better. I knew I was staring at a mirror image, a double of myself, caught in the dark void of the wall. There was a chilling familiarity in the gaze, a sense of knowing that sent a wave of icy fear through my veins. The whole seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy, the shadows shifting, the face contorting. It beckoned me, a silent, irresistible call. I felt a strange urge to reach out, to touch the face, to explore the darkness that lay beyond. "It's just a trick of the light," Ben repeated, his voice tight with fear. "Just a reflection." But I knew it was not a trick of the light. This was something else, something dark and unsettling. This was not a reflection, this was a duplicate, a doppelganger, a mirror image of myself, trapped in the wall. The face within the hole remained, a silent presence, its eyes locked upon me, its smile ever present. The wall was no longer a barrier, a comforting separation between me and the world outside. It was now an unsettling portal, a gateway to a realm of darkness, a reflection of my own being, twisted, distorted, and filled with an unsettling, chilling malice. The next few days were a blur. Ben was more of a nuisance than a friend, constantly trying to distract me, or worse, explain away the hole as a weird construction error. The landlord, a perpetually grumbling man with greasy hair and a perpetual frown, refused to acknowledge the problem, simply muttering about kids being kids and stupid pranks. But I couldn't escape the truth. The hole had become an obsession, a haunting presence. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I would catch glimpses of the face, the smile widening, the eyes burning with an unsettling hunger. It felt like it was watching me, waiting, an echo of my own thoughts and desires, a mockery of my own existence. One night, while Ben was out, I stood before the hole, staring into the darkness within. A strange calm had settled over me. I felt a strange sense of connection, a sense of familiarity that transcended fear. This entity, this doppelganger, was a part of me, a shadow self, a darker reflection of my own soul. The face in the hole seemed to sense my change of heart. The smile widened, becoming a grotesque parody of human emotion, a twisted, unnatural grin that stretched from ear to ear. The eyes narrowed, and a sudden, visceral feeling of dread flooded me. The urge to reach out, to touch the face, to explore the darkness beyond was overwhelming. It was a siren call, beckoning me to cross the boundary, to embrace the darkness that pulsed within me. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grazed the edge of the hole. The surface was cool, smooth, and unyielding, the paint cracked and chipped. My fingers grazed the boundary, a thin membrane separating me from the dark void. The touch was undeniable, a chilling sensation that sent a wave of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The face in the hole shifted, the eyes narrowing, the smile widening. It was a promise, a greeting, an invitation. It was a reflection of my own fear, my own desire, my own forbidden yearning. And then it spoke. Or at least, that's what I thought. It was not a voice, but a sensation, a feeling of knowing, a shared thought, a collective consciousness. It was a whisper, a murmur, a soft hum that resonated within my own mind. "Join me," it whispered, a voice that seemed to be both my own and not my own at the same time. I felt a tug, a pull, a powerful urge that surged through my body, a sensation of being drawn into the darkness, into the void, into the mirror image of myself. I was terrified, but I was also strangely drawn to it, captivated by the darkness, mesmerized by the promise of something more. I felt a strange sense of liberation, a feeling of escape from the mundane, the ordinary, the limitations of my own existence. I stepped forward, my body trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I crossed the boundary, the thin membrane of painted plaster, and stepped into the darkness. The face within the hole smiled, a wide, grotesque grin that stretched from ear to ear. It was a welcoming smile, a promise of something more, something dark and unsettling, something that resonated with the darkest corners of my own soul. I disappeared into the hole, the darkness swallowing me whole. I felt a sudden, intense surge of energy, a sense of liberation, a release from the boundaries of my own body. I was no longer confined by skin and bone, by the limitations of flesh and blood. I was something else, something more. I looked back, but the hole was empty. There was only the smooth, cool surface of the wall, the chipped paint, the cracked and faded plaster. The darkness had swallowed me whole, leaving only a void behind. I was no longer myself. I was something else, something dark and unsettling, something that resonated with the deepest recesses of my own soul. I was a reflection, a duplicate, a doppelganger. And I was free. The world outside the hole seemed different now, as if viewed through a distorted lens. The familiar city streets, the bustling crowd, the vibrant colors, all seemed muted, toned down, lacking the vibrancy and life that they once possessed. I felt a sense of detachment, a distance from the world around me. I was an observer, a spectator, a ghost in my own life. I could feel the world around me, but I could not interact with it, could not truly be a part of it. I felt a sense of power, a sense of liberation, a freedom from the confines of my own body, my own identity, my own humanity. But this freedom came at a price. I was no longer the same. I was something else, something darker, something that had been hidden within me, something that I no longer recognized. I realized that the hole was not a portal to another world, but a mirror reflecting the darkness within myself. It was a manifestation of my own fears, my own desires, my own darkest secrets. I had crossed the boundary, stepped into the darkness, and in doing so, I had become a part of it. I looked at my reflection in the window, and I saw a stranger staring back at me. A stranger with pale skin, dark eyes, and a smile that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. It was me, but it wasn't me. It was a reflection, a doppelganger, a mirror image of myself, twisted, distorted, and filled with an unsettling, chilling malice. I had embraced the darkness, and it had embraced me back. And now I was trapped. The world outside was a constant reminder of what I had lost. It was a world of light, of warmth, of love, of life. It was a world that I could no longer be a part of. I was trapped in a world of shadows, a world of darkness, a world of my own making. I was a reflection, a doppelganger, a mirror image of myself, forever imprisoned in the darkness of my own soul. I was no longer myself. I was a monster. The fear that I had once felt was now a constant companion, a gnawing sense of dread that never left me. I was alone, trapped in a prison of my own making. I wanted to scream, to shout, to reach out for help, but I knew that no one would understand. I was a monster, a creature of darkness, a shadow of my former self. All I could do was watch, a silent observer in a world that I could no longer be a part of. The hole in the wall remained, a constant reminder of my fate. It was a portal to a world of darkness, a reflection of my own soul, a mirror image of my own twisted desires. And I was trapped. Sam says it's just my imagination running wild. But I know what I saw, and it's not something a therapist can easily dismiss. The first time I saw the dark figure, I was lying in bed, drenched in sweat, struggling to shake off the remnants of a nightmare that felt far too real. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, casting a pale, flickering light over the room. The shadows in the corner seemed to move with a life of their own, and I could have sworn I heard the faint echoes of anguished wails. I stumbled out of bed and rushed to my parents' room. It was always the same, terrifying visions of them lying motionless, their eyes wide open, as if they were trapped between life and death. As I approached their room, the sight was always the same: their cold, lifeless bodies in their bed. The paramedics would come, shaking their heads in disbelief, unable to provide an explanation. My parents' deaths were ruled natural, but I knew the truth: my nightmares were killing them. It all began a year ago, just after we moved into the old house on the outskirts of town. The property had a grim history. An old schoolhouse had once stood on the grounds, and the barn next to our house had been converted from the same building. The local children had always whispered about the place, saying it was haunted by the spirits of those who had suffered there. The nightmares started shortly after we moved in. At first, they were merely disturbing dreams, fragments of horror that made me wake up in a cold sweat. But as time went on, the dreams became more intense, more detailed, and more horrifying. Each night, the scenes played out with precise accuracy, and each morning, I would find my parents' bodies in the exact position they were in during my nightmares. Sam, my psychiatrist, insists that it's just a manifestation of my stress and anxiety. "Your mind is projecting your fears onto these dreams," he says, his voice calm and reassuring. "There's no supernatural force at work here. You need to focus on grounding yourself and not let these dreams control you." But it's hard to believe that when the nightmares keep coming true. I've tried everything Sam suggested: journaling, therapy, medication, but nothing seems to help. The fear is always there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, and each night, I dread falling asleep. The nightmare that changed everything occurred on a night when the air was thick with an oppressive silence. I was trapped in a dark, endless corridor. The walls pulsed with a sickly green light, and the air was filled with the distant cries of the damned. The shadows moved like living things, writhing and twisting in a grotesque dance. In the heart of the corridor, I saw my parents' bodies lying on the floor. Their eyes were wide open, but they didn't see me. Instead, they stared at something beyond the darkness, something I couldn't see. The scene was so vivid, so horrifyingly real, that I could feel the cold sweat on my skin even as I lay in bed. I reached out to them, but the darkness consumed everything around me, and I woke up gasping for air. When I went to their room that night, I was met with the same chilling sight. Their bodies were cold and lifeless, just as they had been in my nightmare. The paramedics arrived, but their faces were filled with a mix of pity and confusion. There were no signs of foul play, no medical explanations for their deaths. It was as if my nightmares had reached into reality and stolen their lives. Since that night, the nightmares have become more intense. Each vision brings a new horror, a new detail that feels all too real. The dark figure, with its hollow eyes and skeletal fingers, has become a constant presence in my dreams. It looms over me, reaching out with a predatory grace, as if it's waiting for the perfect moment to claim me. Last night, the nightmare was particularly vivid. I saw the figure emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It moved with an unnatural, jerky motion, its fingers stretching out towards me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness enveloped me, and I could feel the figure's cold, clammy fingers brushing against my skin. I woke up to find the room still dark, but the fear had already settled into my bones. The figure's presence was unmistakable, and I could feel its gaze on me even when I was awake. I tried to tell Sam about the latest vision, but his response was always the same. "It's a manifestation of your fears. You need to confront these feelings and work through them." But how can I confront something that seems to defy all logic and reason? How can I fight an enemy that exists only in the darkest recesses of my mind? I'm running out of time, and the nightmares are becoming more frequent, more brutal. I decided to investigate the history of the property, hoping to find some clue that could explain the nightmarish occurrences. I went to the local library and dug through old records, uncovering the dark history of the schoolhouse and the barn. The building had been used for years as a place of confinement and punishment for native children, a place where many had suffered and died. The more I learned, the more I felt a connection between the dark figure and the tragic history of the property. It was as if the pain and suffering of those who had been wronged had seeped into the very fabric of the place, manifesting as a malevolent entity that preyed on my deepest fears. As I dug deeper, I found that others had experienced similar phenomena in the area, stories of haunted houses and cursed lands, where the past bled into the present. The common thread was always a sense of impending doom, an inescapable darkness that seemed to come from within. With this newfound knowledge, I returned to my home, determined to confront the dark figure in my dreams. I prepared myself mentally, using every technique Sam had taught me to ground myself and stay focused. But when I went to bed that night, I knew that the true test was yet to come. The nightmare began as it always did, with the corridor, the green light, and the wailing shadows. But this time, I was ready. As the dark figure emerged from the shadows, I faced it with a steely resolve. I forced myself to look into its hollow eyes, to confront the fear that had haunted me for so long. The figure stopped in its tracks, as if surprised by my defiance. It reached out with its skeletal fingers, but I stood my ground. I refused to let it control me, to let it claim me as its next victim. I focused on the light, on the hope that there was a way to break free from the cycle of nightmares and death. With every ounce of strength I had, I fought against the darkness. The figure's form began to waver, its shadows dissolving into the ether. The corridor brightened, and the anguished cries faded into silence. I felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my chest. When I woke up, the room was bathed in the early morning light. I felt a strange sense of calm, a hope that perhaps the nightmares had finally been vanquished. I looked around, half expecting to see the dark figure lurking in the shadows, but it was gone. Sam's voice was calm and reassuring when I spoke to him later. He said that facing my fears was a significant step in overcoming them. I could sense a hint of skepticism in his voice, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that the nightmares might finally be over. As I looked out the window, the sun rising over the horizon, I knew that the darkness had been pushed back, at least for now. The past still haunted the land, and the scars of suffering would always remain. But for the first time, I felt that I might be able to find peace amidst the shadows. After what felt like an eternity of job hunting, I finally received some promising news. My resume had been shortlisted for a position in Dallas, a dream I'd been chasing for years. The company asked for passport-size photos and a scanned copy of my passport. I promptly sent the documents and, to my relief, received my joining letter within a few days. They had arranged for me to stay at a guest house for the first 15 days, a temporary arrangement until I could find a place of my own. I packed my bags, fueled by a mix of excitement and apprehension. Dallas was a whole new world, a world I was both eager to explore and hesitant to enter. The flight was uneventful, and as I stepped off the plane, the Texas air hit me with a warm embrace. It felt like a welcome hug, a promise of new beginnings. The taxi ride to the guest house was short, and as we pulled up to a small, unassuming building, I felt a pang of disappointment. The building looked nothing like the photos I'd seen online. It was smaller, more rundown, with a faded paint job and overgrown ivy creeping up the walls. I entered the guest house and was greeted by a woman with a tired smile, her eyes holding a weary wisdom that spoke of years spent dealing with travelers and their stories. She took my passport and confirmed my details, her voice a whisper that barely rose above the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The guest house, she explained, was a family-run establishment, with just 2 rooms available for guests. The other rooms were occupied by the staff, a family of 3, and the rest were used for storage or left vacant. The moment I entered my assigned room, an unnerving feeling washed over me. It was smaller than I expected, crammed with furniture, a bed, wardrobe, TV stand, dressing table, and chair, leaving barely any room to move. The walls were painted in a faded yellow, and the carpet felt rough under my bare feet. An overwhelming feeling of claustrophobia settled over me, a feeling that made my chest tighten and my breathing shallow. The furniture was old and worn, the bed springs creaking with every movement. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the initial shock of a new place, a new environment. I settled onto the bed, the worn mattress feeling oddly cold against my skin. Turning on the TV, I tried to immerse myself in the news, to distract myself from the creeping unease. My gaze kept drifting to the mirror on the dressing table, a tall, ornate mirror that seemed to dominate the room. As I watched the news, my reflection flickered, the image distorted for a moment before snapping back into focus. I blinked, wondering if it was just my imagination, but then I saw it again, a fleeting glimpse of movement in the reflection, a shimmer of something standing just outside the window behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs as I whipped around, but there was no one there. The window was closed, the curtains drawn, and the room remained empty. Just then, I felt a warm breath on my left shoulder, like a feather-light touch. My heart raced as I turned back to face the mirror, but the presence had vanished. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the distant echoes of traffic from the street outside. Before I could process what was happening, my phone buzzed. It was my girlfriend, asking if I could send her some selfies. "Show me your new digs," she typed. I took a few quick pictures of the small room, the worn-out furniture, the mirror that seemed to be staring back at me. I sent them over, relieved to have something else to focus on. Her reply came back almost immediately, and it was strange. "The photos are nice," she typed. "But why weren't you able to talk to me tonight?" Confused, I asked her what she meant. She explained that in one of the selfies, it looked like someone was sitting behind me, reading a newspaper. The chair in the room was empty, and there was no one in the vicinity. Panic set in. My heart hammered against my ribs, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I raced out of the room, my legs feeling heavy and unsteady. I found the room's service attendant, a young man with tired eyes and a faint, almost permanent frown etched on his face. I told him I couldn't stay in that room, explaining my experience with the reflection and the unnerving presence that had followed me. He listened patiently, his expression unchanging, his eyes holding a strange, knowing look. "It happens sometimes," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "This place has a history. Some things—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Without a word, he led me to a different room, a smaller, more cramped room at the end of the hallway. As I settled into the new space, the housekeeping staff, an older couple with faces etched with worry, warned me not to keep the TV volume too high, as it might disturb the neighbors. I found this odd because the guest house was quite small, with just a few rooms and a hallway that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Their comment, "What you can't see is often right next to you," only heightened my unease. That night, I woke up to a strange and persistent smell filling the room, cigarettes, even though I don't smoke. I got up to investigate, and found the bathroom thick with smoke. I peered out the window, but there was nothing outside, no neighboring buildings, just a patch of overgrown grass. I tried to open the bathroom window, but it was locked. I turned back, and as I reached for the doorknob, a sudden chill ran down my spine, as if someone had brushed past me, sending a wave of cold air across my skin. The bathroom door creaked shut on its own, and I heard faint footsteps moving away from my room, the sound echoing through the silent guest house. My heart pounded in my chest. I opened the bathroom door, the air thick with the smell of smoke, and saw cigarette marks on the floor, a sign of a recent presence. Stepping inside, I saw that the bed was indented, as though someone had been lying there. I quickly snapped a photo of the bed and sent it to my girlfriend, asking if she noticed anything unusual in the picture. Her response came back quickly, saying that she saw the same eerie figure behind me in the selfie. It was the same figure she had seen in the first selfie, the one I had taken in the previous room, the figure of a man, his back turned to the camera, holding a newspaper, the faint outline of his body visible through the translucent curtain. That was the final straw. I knew I needed to get out of there, before whatever was haunting the guest house decided to make itself more known. I packed my bags, my hands shaking, my mind racing with every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the windows. I couldn't stay there any longer. It was time to find a new place, a new beginning. My job was waiting, but so was the fear, a fear that threatened to swallow me whole. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was never truly alone. As I walked out of the guest house, The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I hailed a taxi, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the guest house, the small, unassuming building that had become a place of nightmares. It stood there, shrouded in the early morning mist, a silent sentinel of secrets, a testament to the unseen forces that can linger in the shadows, waiting to be revealed.